You ever have that one person that just kind of gets under your skin? I mean, probably not. We're a bunch of Christians, right? So, I mean, nobody ever annoys us. We're cool, calm, and collected all the time. No? Well, I think that there are all sorts of those people. Maybe it's just the way they talk, you know, and every time they talk, you're like, fingernails, chalkboard, stop. Maybe it's because they seem to just like have the Midas touch. Everything they do works out, and in your life, it's just not that way. And so you just get upset. Like, why does it always work for them and not for me? Maybe they always have the right answer. Even, you know, when they don't have the answer, do you know any of those people? They always seem to know the right thing to do. Or maybe it's like, you know, they just never listen to anything that you have to say. Or maybe they always seem to need something. Am I hitting the nail on the head yet? At all? So I want you to just work with me a little bit. I know that a lot of you came in with like a spouse or a significant other here this morning. So we're going to just take a moment here in the service. If you could just kind of turn and make eye contact if they're here this morning. And I want you to look deep into their soul and repeat after me. I'm sorry. Right? Because we can be this kind of annoying in our relationships. But I think that we all know that seriously, like there's a lot of other people out there too that really can kind of get on our nerves. Now, I want to share with you a story from my life. It's not one of my proudest moments. I mean, there's definitely a side of me that's like, oh yeah, I own that. But that's completely pride, right? I'm just going there. So in high school, I had this one kid that just... oil and water. We just didn't get along, right? There was something about him, and I'm a shy, quiet person by nature, especially in high school. You know, I didn't go out of my way, didn't extend myself, just kind of stayed back, minded my own business. And so we are entering into the lunchroom, and he has been picking on my brother, who's a few years younger than I am. In full disclosure, my brother probably deserved it. I can almost guarantee it. He had a big mouth, and he oftentimes let it get him into trouble. And quite frankly, probably needed to be punched in the face to put him back in his place. I mean, that's my brother, right? And so anyway, you know, they get into an argument, and blood is pretty thick. And so even though I'm like, yeah, my brother does that to me all the time, drives me nuts, I'm thinking, I'm going to take you down, buddy. You just messed with the wrong person. And so that day we're having lunch. We're having peas for lunch. And I'm sitting like across the table from him. His back is to my front, and so I'm just picking up peas like one at a time. Boom. 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 He turns, kind of looks at me. Boom. Like, I just knew, like in that time, and that, like, it was on. Like, you say something, you do something, it's going to be more than a pea, buddy. Boom. Right? We walk down the hallway after lunch. I grab a handful of peas. I mean, it's a good weapon, right? Peas. Boom. All the way down the hall. Boom. And then he turns around and gets in my face. And I don't know, something about, at that point in time, I just grew about a foot taller and a foot wider. And it's like I could have been on WWF when that was a thing. It's like, you're going down, buddy. And it's not, like I said, it's not one of my proudest moments. But I think that inside of each of us is kind of this angry giant lurching to get out with that certain someone that just keeps getting at us. A lot of times we kind of internalize it though, don't we? Like we just kind of force it in, like, oh, don't say anything, let's go around this situation. It's going all right, thank you. Right? We put on a show. And today's story, as we continue our Arise series into the story of Esther, we're going to see two guys that are kind of like that. Oil and water. They just get at each other. And they drive each other absolutely bonkers. And so if you want to go ahead and turn to Esther, page 410 in the Bibles we provide, we're going to be in chapter 2, verse 19. So I believe that's page 411. And while you're getting there, I'm going to bring you up to speed on where we've been so far in chapter 1 through chapter 2, verse 18. So we're introduced to this king, Ahasuerus, who is also known as Xerxes. If you've seen 300, you kind of have an idea who this Xerxes guy is. Right? He is the biggest name king leading the biggest, largest empire that there is. The largest empire known to man at that time. Matter of fact, it would be about equivalent in size to the United States. It's huge, right? And so he's leading this. And his personality, the closest I can think of is like if you could take the president and all the power and glory that comes with being the president and combine that with all the wealth of somebody like a Bill Gates, and then you put it together with, I don't know, the womanizer of Hugh Hefner, like just twist it all up. That's a pretty good picture, I think, of King Xerxes. He's just not a good guy, right? And this is who's leading. And you at least get a picture in chapter 1 of kind of an insecure leader, right? Because King Xerxes, he invites all of his officials in for a 6-month party. And so he wants to show them all of his stuff and how great it is and how much money he's got and how many women are at his disposal. And he wants to offer them, free drinks and free women. And he's just living it up. All attention on me. I am the greatest. You see, King Xerxes, he kind of acted like he was a god, and people kind of treated him like one. And he wanted that attention. And it seemed like his search for significance kind of went that direction as well. Look at me. Look at my stuff. Look what I can do. Come, lavish upon me. Come, worship me. And then that wasn't enough. So over 6 months, about 15,000 people coming in and going out into the palace. He opens up the party to everybody. And so no matter how rich or poor you were, significant or insignificant that you may feel, you were invited into the presence of King Xerxes. And you got to see just how amazing his palace is. It's like you get this tour on the biggest mansion around, right? Lifestyles of the rich and famous, cribs, eat your heart out like we're going to see King Xerxes' palace. And he's opening up the bar. And it's free, all you can drink, all that you want. And it says that the queen, Vashti, she was in a different palace, having a party for the ladies. But I don't want you to miss something. There are still ladies present at this party. It's just not the wives. Right? They got their own thing going on. This is a big drunken orgy of a party. It's a mess. Right? And this story is in Scripture, and we're like, what is the deal here? Why this? This doesn't really make sense. And then amidst all of this splendor, it gets worse. Right? Because he wants to show off everything that he's got. Everything includes his wife, Queen Vashti. And so he sends the eunuchs, men that have been castrated who care for all these beautiful women, to go get his wife Vashti and bring her in so that she can show the crown jewels to everyone. And by that I mean she's wearing just a crown. It's crazy, right? But I want to pause there for a minute and kind of give you another option. And I really think it's kind of a blending of the two. So if you were the leader of an empire the size of the United States, largest to ever be known at this point in time, different areas, different languages, dialects being spoken, how in the world do you bring all of those people into submission? If you have a group of leaders and officials that number somewhere in the neighborhood of 15,000 people, how do you keep them subject to you? Well, I would think one of the ways that you could do that is throw a big party. Give them free booze, free women, a week's vacation, paid, right? These guys are, oh, King Xerxes, he's a god. This is great. He's awesome. All this free stuff. But I would still say, as true as that may be, that he might have went that route, I think there was still this insecurity just lying below the surface. Why do I think that? Because Queen Vashti was invited in. He's got this treasure that's reserved for only him, and he wants to show it off to everybody. The only way I can think that this would even be remotely possible is if you want other people to look at you and go, how awesome you are. And why would you do that? It's because you're insecure in who you are. Well, to make matters worse, Vashti refuses. He blows up, gets angry. His plan backfires. All these guys are supposed to go, yeah, you're the man. And in this moment, he is the man who's been humiliated. And so he does what most good guys would do. He goes and asks his friends, these supposedly wise guys, what he should do in response to this. And what do they say? Oh, it's humiliation. You shouldn't have to put up with this. You should take her, remove her from your presence, and then you should go search for a better, more beautiful queen. But underneath the surface of their comments were, you know what? Vashti's over there with all the ladies. Among those ladies are wives. And if Vashti stands up to you, guess what our women are going to do to us? This is not going to be good. So, Xerxes, you need to put your foot down. Put your foot down. Don't let her get away with this, because then, we need to set the precedence here. This is what's going on. And as we take a pause here, I want you to remember a couple things. In Scripture, there's many times where it talks about women being submissive to their husbands. I think that this story kind of takes that a bit far, right? This guy was an absolute pig of a man. And she stood up to him. And I think sometimes we have to be willing to stand up against some of that oppression. But I want you to also notice something that happened for Vashti. Right? She was removed from the presence of the king. I'm not sure that was a bad idea or a bad thing, like considering who he was. But sometimes when you take that stand, it's going to cost you. It really is. And I think if we're really going to be honest, especially for the fellas in the room, we're probably way more like King Xerxes than we'd like to admit. That if someone were to give us all that power and all that wealth and that vast empire, that probably the depravity that's inside of us would chase after the money, the wealth, the women, and there would be a part of us that amidst all of those things would leave us insecure and searching. And so why do we do that? I think there's also this side of things that indicates that King Xerxes, the king, he kind of writes the law. That because King Xerxes says it's okay, because there's this law, that it's okay to do it. But I want to challenge you with something. It kind of goes back a couple sermon series ago and raise the bar. Jesus, the Sermon on the Mount, where he says, it's not just about the external, right? It's not just about committing adultery, but if you even look lustfully, you've already committed adultery in your heart. It's not just about murdering other people. If you've hated them on the inner parts of your being, then you've already committed murder. It's not just about helping people, but if your motives are wrong when you help them, that's not good enough. You see, we serve a greater king than King Xerxes. And we serve a higher law than King Xerxes can give. And so you and I as believers are called to something else. And just because something is legal doesn't mean it's the right thing to do. Right? And if you dig deep enough into that one little truth right there, there might be a nugget that you can take with you in the culture that we live in today. Just because it's legal doesn't make it right. Right? What's the moral side of things? What's the biblical side of things saying? And which king is it that you're following? Because we've got this king in Jesus that is looking for so much more than all of this. And speaking of this whole God thing, we're now a couple chapters in and we're not seeing him anywhere. And I think the truth of the matter is that you and I sometimes in life, we get caught up into things, right? We pursue significance in our achievements, in our success, in our wealth, in our jobs, in who we're married to, in what kind of experiences we have or that we don't have, right? In all of these things, we search for a certain level of significance. And then when we do so, we kind of miss God in the process. And I believe the same way that God is kind of lurking in the background of the story of Esther and how we're going to be talking about him rising to the surface through all of this stuff. I believe without a shadow of a doubt that despite all that's been done in your life, all the mistakes that you've made, all the choices that you made, all the things that you say, man, I wish I would have never done that. I wish I'd have never said that. I can't believe that I allowed myself to get to this point, that I've endured this kind of addiction, that I've allowed myself to be mistreated this way, that I've mistreated other people this way, that whatever kind of abuse you may have had growing up in your family or what kind of abusive relationship that maybe you've been in, whatever, the sky is the limit. And you think, when you look around, where is God in all of this? My prayer is that through Esther, you can realize that God is at work, even when you're not working it for God. Right? Because His grace does not depend upon our achievements. And that's a huge, huge blessing. But I would hope that unlike Esther and Mordecai, you and I would turn to God. And that you and I would allow Him to work in our lives to do amazing things. Well, the whole story takes a turn. It gets worse and better at the same time. And so here it is. So King Xerxes pursuing after this next queen. And it says that there in the land is this man Mordecai, a Jew. He's been brought over from Israel in the Babylonian exile. So Babylon took over. Persia's now taken over. They've got a bigger empire. And he's raising his cousin like it's his own daughter, Hadassah. We know her as Esther. She's an orphan. Her parents are both deceased. And so in our mind's eye, in our very VeggieTale, kid-friendly world, right, we picture that this Esther, oh, she's a poor Jewish girl. Mom and dad have passed away. This is like Disney princess waiting to happen. And there's Esther, right? And Esther is a part of this glorified beauty contest, which is way worse than that, because the king says, go get all of the beautiful virgins and send them through this beautification process over a year, and then bring them to me one at a time, and I will test drive them over the night. And this is what Esther has entered into this really weird Bachelor of Persia contest. Right? And this is the man, right? Did I mention that Vashti, this isn't her first husband. She was married to his brother before that. It doesn't say that in Scripture, but in the books of history you can go back. And so he takes what he wants and makes it his. Oh, and by the way, he kind of liked his brother's daughter too. And then he had all of these wives, concubines. You see, Vashti, she was just the woman who wore the crown. She wasn't the only woman. So imagine this. Like, this isn't written into a Disney princess storyline. This is not carved up into our Sunday school curriculum or presented into any kind of vegetable form whatsoever. Right? This is messed up. And Hadassah, Esther, gets a chance to be the queen of this pagan empire, along with all of these other women in the entourage of King Xerxes. Man, where is God? I'm going to take you now to Esther, chapter 2, verse 19. It says, now when the virgins were gathered together the second time, and I would say not quite virgins. I don't know if this is like, after they had been with King Xerxes. But it says the virgins were gathered together a second time. Mordecai was sitting at the king's gate. Probably they're checking on Esther again. Esther had not made known her kindred or her people as Mordecai had commanded her. For Esther obeyed Mordecai just as when she was brought up by him. In those days, as Mordecai was sitting at the king's gate, Bigthan and Teresh, two of the king's eunuchs, again, guys who have been castrated who are watching over the beautiful women, right, who guarded the threshold, became angry and sought to lay hands on King Ahasuerus. Perhaps it's because he had them castrated. I don't know. Maybe reading into something. That's probably enough for most guys. Like, okay, had it. This guy needs to go. Right? We don't know the whole story here, but what we do know is that they're not happy with the king. And Mordecai hears this. And so Mordecai wants to make sure that the king is aware. So he tells Esther. Esther tells the king, hey, Mordecai heard this. Again, there's just not a lot of details. Is it possible that Mordecai was wanting to get ahead? Maybe get a pat on the back? Maybe get some sort of promotion? I don't know. But what he did get, it says at the end of chapter 2, was a little footnote in the book of history. Oh yeah, and this one day, Mordecai overheard this plot, saved the king's life, yada, yada. Right? Footnote in history. We're going to save that and come back to it a little bit later because God is continually lurking beneath the surface of this story. Now, I think that there's another interesting note here that Isaiah, the prophet, talks about the ability for the Israelites to go back home. Right? There is the story in Ezra as well. So the Israelites had this opportunity to go back to Israel. Go home. And somewhere in there, Mordecai and his family, they chose to stay. I don't know why they chose to stay. Maybe it's because they didn't know any better. Maybe it's because they didn't want to change. We never do anything just because simply we don't want to change anything, do we? And so they didn't go. And Mordecai had that chance, but here he is in this story. Nothing seems to be clicking according to the will of God. Like, I can't imagine God would write this story and this is the way he would write it. This doesn't make sense. But we're seeing this tension begin to build because in chapter 3, we're introduced to this man, Haman. And it says, after this, King Ahasuerus promoted Haman the Agagite, the son of Hammedatha, and advanced him and set his throne above all the officials who were with him. And all the king's servants who were at the king's gate bowed down and paid homage to Haman, for the king had so commanded concerning him. So at the end of chapter 2, Mordecai saves the day. Right? And these guys, the eunuchs, they're hung on the gallows. Victory is won. Mordecai, footnote. Chapter 3, Haman. Haman the Agagite. That name's like, it means nothing, right? Agagite, like these are one of those words that we skip over, but there was this guy in the Old Testament, Agag, that was against the Israelites. Matter of fact, King Saul was told to annihilate the Agagites, and he didn't do it. Right? And here is this enemy of the Jews living amongst the Jews, or at least maybe we should say the Jews living amongst them. Right? And so the tension is building because this person, Haman, he has a story, he has a name. My kids have just started getting into Saved by the Bell. It's an old school show. Used to watch it as a kid. If you're old like me, you get it. Like you've been there. And so the kids are watching it. And so there's this whole school drama, the tension between Bayside High and Valley, and they're at each other, right? And think about this rivalry that exists. Like your family, maybe you're a Romeo and Juliet fan, right? Your family going against the other family, and it doesn't matter who they are, but their name is just like, oh, goosebumps, hatred. And I think that this is probably how Mordecai felt. Okay, I saved the king's life and I got nothing. Right? And here's my enemy and he's now reigning above and I'm supposed to just come in and bow down to him. Again, it doesn't really elaborate, but I do notice that this Mordecai, who didn't seem to have a spine before, let me back that train up so you understand what I'm saying. So it says that Mordecai, he was raising Esther like his own daughter. And I've kind of talked to you about the king a little bit. His demeanor, right? Womanizer. Prideful, right? This guy has a beauty contest and has sex with a bunch of different ladies just to see who he can find to be his next queen. And if your daughter was going to be a part of that, what would you do to stand up to that king? Even if it risked your life. Would you do it? I think probably across this room we would find a lot of guys, a lot of dads that would be going to bat if it cost everything. And in that moment, Mordecai did not. Now, maybe Mordecai and Esther, they didn't know these stories like, back in Babylon just a few years before that, when some of the wisest and the best of Israel had been taken away. And there was this guy, Daniel, I think was his name. And Daniel stood up to the king, right? God provided. Some antagonists were attacking Daniel. He was thrown into a lion den. God provided. He had some friends, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, thrown into a fiery furnace, and God provided. Yeah, I probably missed out on those stories altogether. I don't know. And I realize that I'm embellishing some of the story here, but I'm trying to understand historically in the context, like Mordecai, is he the hero of the story? Because this isn't making sense. It's now that Haman's in charge, and he's supposed to bow to Haman, then all of a sudden he's like, no guys, can't, sorry, I'm a Jew. I am conveniently a believer right now. Has this ever happened in your life? I'm just a guy, just a dude. I don't do that. And then all of a sudden there's this moment in time where it's convenient to be a Christian. Oh yeah, I'm one of those. Sometimes we do that. Right? And sometimes we're this hollow shell. I like what Pastor Craig Rochelle from Life Church says. He calls it a Christian atheist. We did this series a while back, the Christian atheist. So on the outside, we have this name of Christ, but on the inside, we're living like an atheist. Like it's just a hollow shell. It's nothing but church clothes on the outside, but no deep convictions on the inside. And so now when it's convenient, Mordecai, yep, I'm a believer, I wouldn't eat. No, never mind. Sorry, sometimes things just come to me as I'm going. It's just, that's the way it is. So Mordecai doesn't bow down. The officials, they see what's going on. Haman, obviously, he misses out on this a little bit. And so they go and they tell Haman, but not until after watching him, because he says he's a Jew. Let's make sure he's behaving like a Jew. And maybe this is one of the things that holds us up from being vocal with our Christianity. We don't want to be put under the microscope and everybody to analyze. Are they actually doing what they said they would do? Are they behaving the way they should behave? And so he's being microanalyzed. They tell the story to Haman. Haman is furious because if you're prideful and arrogant and somebody doesn't bow down, obviously there's an issue. And I can't help but imagine that the two of them, day by day, as this is playing down, after the story has been told to Haman, Haman is walking by Mordecai. And he just gets these chills. Like his skin just crawls. This guy is, he's just getting to me. He just won't bow down. He won't listen. He won't submit. And everybody else is going to be seeing him. And they're going to take this the wrong way. And they're not going to bow down either. And I'm going to lose this battle. And now I'm not going to lose this battle. And this is not going to happen. And perhaps at the same time, Mordecai, every time Haman is passing by, oil and water, right? And he's looking at this guy's, what a pompous, arrogant, blah, 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 right? And so they're just at each other. And the crazy thing is, God isn't mentioned at all. And I don't believe it's God's will. Why not? We just went through a series in 1 Peter. And I talked about this idea of submission. Right? And what were the believers supposed to do? They were supposed to submit to Nero. The same Nero that was crucifying believers. Right? Stitching them to animal skins and sicking wild dogs in them, lighting them on fire for his own pleasure. Right? And they're still supposed to submit. And Mordecai he's just not. Right? But God, in His infinite wisdom and His great mercy, is there behind the scenes, and He's about to use this in a pretty profound way. So as we read on in chapter 3, we realize that they want to go to the king. Specifically, Haman wants to take this to the king. Why? Not because of just Mordecai, but he wants to annihilate the entire Jewish community. And so he goes to the king, but not before casting lots. They call it purs, so it's kind of like dice. Casting lots. And it has this air of divination about it. So what they're really wanting to know is, when is a good time to go approach the king? So let's ask these magic dice when we should go. And so they find the time, they go, they approach the king. Haman walks in, he's got his story prepared, and it's kind of like one of your kids coming in to share this argument that they're having with their siblings. You know, the kind where they only come in and share their part of the story? Oh, they won't leave me alone, they keep picking on me. What did you do? Right? What's the other side of the story? You know, the kind of a story where they leave out certain details that might be a little incriminating, kind of. And so this is what's happening, and you can read in this section, verses 7 through 11, how he's telling the story, and he's like, there's this group of people, and they're not really living according to your law, and they just kind of need to go. Matter of fact, if you can, help me get them out the door, I'll pay you for it. I'll put some money into the treasury. And so what does King Ahasuerus, King Xerxes, do? Well, he gives them permission. Yeah, cool, let's go do it. And so he gives him his signet ring, which is kind of like his power of attorney. Here, go make your law, your letter, stamp it with my seal of approval on the end and make it happen. And by the way, just keep your money. That's cool. And so he goes and he writes this thing up. And it's kind of cool because he writes it, and they get it translated into all these different languages to go to all the different provinces to go out. And then they send it by courier. This is like a precursor to the postal system. They actually had in Persia this postal system at work. And they delivered it. And it said that on this certain day, all of the Jews are to be annihilated at once. And you're to take all of their stuff. Happy day! Woo! And guess what? News gets out. The people in Susa they're brokenhearted. They don't know what to do. And it appears in the end of chapter 3, starting in verse 15, the couriers went out and they hurried by order of the king. And the decree was issued in Susa, the citadel, and the king and Haman sat down to drink, but the city of Susa was thrown into confusion. Seems like the king and Haman just sat down to have a cold one. Well, they've just ordered the execution of all these Jews. I don't know, is there any other story in history that kind of talks about an entire group of people being annihilated? It's just not a good thing. And this is what was taking place in Persia. And we're now 3 chapters into Esther. And it still is like, what, God? How does this make sense on any planet? God, where are you amidst all of this? And I want to share with you guys that despite all that you've done and all that's been done to you and all of the mess that's around you and all of the addiction that maybe you've had to endure, and every time that somebody has hurt you, or maybe the times that you have hurt or not been there for other people, it's probably not in God's plan to make that all happen. But I do believe wholeheartedly, like in the story of Esther, God is at work behind the scenes. In all of these things that seem so bad, and they are, right? This is a mess. There's no other way to describe it. This is a mess. It's evil upon evil. It's ridiculous. But that God is going to provide a way out. And God is there to provide a way out for you as well. You see, we serve a greater king who has a much greater kingdom. And you and I can choose to just keep on doing what we keep on doing. Or we can choose to realize that there is a God in the background who desperately wants us to realize that He's there. And we can turn to Him. And so it's going to be your choice. Is that the next step that you're going to take? Are you going to take that step away from your junk, your stuff, and towards God? Or are you going to continue to pretend like He doesn't happen? Just continue to look out for number one. Just continuing to try to search for significance. But it's quite possible that in all of the tension, in all of the battles, that God is at work getting ready to do something amazing in your life. And then there's this group of people, I think kind of like Mordecai, who claim to be a Christian. Maybe you're here today going through the motions. A Jew on the outside, Christian, but really only when it's convenient. And I wonder if you'll let God work in your life in such a way that you can have boldness and power in His name. The kind of boldness not so much that was in Esther and Mordecai to this point, but maybe the kind of boldness that was in this pagan queen, Vashti. She's the only one that seems to have any integrity at this point. And we can just press on. Next week, chapter 4, we begin to see things turn. We begin to see that there's hope. We begin to see even more clearly that God is at work. And would you come back and join us next week as we dig into chapter 4? Father, we thank you for allowing us to gather, for bringing any kind of light from this, what seems obscure text. Father, would you just help us to see that you are rising to the surface through this story, and that you desire to rise to the surface in our life. Would you help us to find that kind of hope that we need, that we can keep pressing on? And would you help us to have the boldness, the faith to trust you? To trust you, God, who is so gracious and loving, to come down and to forgive us, to free us from all the things that have gone on in our life. Father, help us to seek you. In Jesus' name.